Imagine a barrel of oil priced at $150. Not $75, not $90, $150. For most of the world, it's a number. But for billions, it's a line between filling a tank or skipping meals. Keeping factories running or shutting them down, feeding children or watching hunger spread. Picture hundreds of oil tankers waiting off the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, anchored like silent giants, loaded with the lifeblood of modern civilization. Welcome to Macro Rewind. If you want to understand the forces threatening global stability, hit like, subscribe, and let's dive into the story that could shape the world economy in 2026. At the heart of this crisis is Iran, a nation holding the fourth largest proven oil reserves on Earth, with crude output historically around 3 to 4 million barrels per day, exporting roughly 1.7 million barrels daily despite years of sanctions. Its oil sector alone generates over $50 billion annually, forming the backbone of the nation's economy. But Iran's influence is not just in its production, it's in its geography. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow 33-kilometer corridor between Iran and Oman, funnels roughly 20 to 27% of the world's traded oil. Block it, and the world's economic pulse begins to falter. Tensions have been building for years. In 2025 and early 2026, Tehran repeatedly threatened to close Hormuz in retaliation for attacks on its nuclear and military infrastructure. Even talk of closure lifted oil prices toward $150 per barrel, a scenario that could ripple across every continent. When oil reaches these heights, it's not just fuel that costs more, everything does. Transportation, electricity, heating, manufacturing, and even fertilizers rely heavily on petroleum. A $150 barrel is not an abstract number. It's a global economic earthquake. Asia is particularly vulnerable. More than 80% of the continent's crude imports pass through the Persian Gulf. Japan imports nearly 90% of its oil. Through this choke point, India roughly the same. Any disruption triggers a rapid spike in energy costs, feeding directly into inflation, weakening currencies, and straining foreign reserves. Developing nations face an even more immediate threat. Countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and multiple African states import almost all their oil. For them, price surges translate into soaring food costs, unstable supply chains, and potential hunger crises. Bangladesh, for instance, would see trade deficits explode, imports skyrocket, and subsidies disappear in weeks if oil stayed near $150. In many of these nations, energy costs can constitute 50 to 70% of import bills. So the economic shock is existential, not theoretical. Now consider supply chains, the invisible veins of global trade. Higher oil prices increase shipping costs, freight rates, and insurance premiums. Factories idle when parts cannot arrive. Food rots before reaching markets. Critical sectors, semiconductors, agriculture, construction, healthcare suffer simultaneously. A single choke point in the Persian Gulf becomes a domino, triggering cascading crises worldwide. Meanwhile, Iran's internal capacity is under strain. Despite significant output, sanctions, financial inefficiency, and discount sales to China mean Tehran often earns only 2/3 of potential market prices. At home, Iran battles shrinking GDP, rising inflation, currency depreciation, and political unrest. The result: a volatile, unpredictable actor capable of tipping global energy markets into chaos. Strategic reserves provide limited relief. The United States holds approximately 415 million barrels in its strategic petroleum reserve. China may have built unreported reserves of 1.3 billion barrels. These buffers help for weeks, but they cannot offset a complete or prolonged disruption. Markets already price in geopolitical risk. Oil traders, economists, and governments alike are nervously watching Tehran and Hormuz as if the world hangs by a thread, because it does. Brent crude, as of early 2026, hovers near 6-month highs above $70 a barrel. The trajectory is upward. Even minor escalations in the region can send futures soaring. Financial instruments, hedges, and derivative markets are all reacting before any physical disruption occurs. The cost is already in the price of everything from gas to electricity to food. The ripple effect is immediate, felt in factories, ports, and homes across the globe. At this point, it's not just a story about energy, it's a story about survival. The potential $150 oil scenario threatens the variability of 35 or more nations to feed their populations, especially in developing regions where energy costs dominate national budgets. Oil isn't just fuel, it's fertilizer, it's shipping, it's electricity, it's transportation. When energy costs double, the price of bread doubles, and millions feel the consequences within days. But the crisis doesn't stop at energy prices. Political stability is the next layer of danger. Nations already facing economic stress are pushed closer to the brink when oil costs skyrocket. In Pakistan, for example, energy imports account for nearly 40% of total imports. A surge to $150 a barrel would force the government to divert funds from infrastructure, healthcare, and social programs just to keep fuel flowing. Inflation spikes, social unrest flares, and governments scramble to maintain legitimacy. In Lebanon, which imports almost all of its energy and faces severe fiscal challenges, a spike in oil costs could trigger political collapse within weeks. Food shortages and price surges often precede unrest, and unrest destabilizes markets further. This is the vicious cycle that few prepared for. Meanwhile, the global economy is already fragile. Central banks, from the Federal Reserve in the U.S. to the European Central Bank, monitor inflation rates that have already been pressured by post-pandemic recovery, supply chain strain, and geopolitical uncertainty. A sudden energy shock of this magnitude would force interest rate hikes, depress investment, and risk recession across multiple continents simultaneously. Emerging markets, in particular, would bear the brunt. Currencies weaken as import bills soar. Debt becomes harder to service. Basic commodities, wheat, corn, rice, inflate beyond affordability. For 35 nations reliant on Middle Eastern energy, the dominoes fall almost immediately. Now visualize the logistics. Oil doesn't simply appear at a refinery when markets demand it. It travels through pipelines, supertankers, and port infrastructure. A blocked or delayed route through the Strait of Hormuz forces ships to reroute thousands of miles around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, an addition of 6,000 miles per voyage. Transit times double, freight costs triple. Insurance premiums spike because insurers now price in geopolitical risk. Every product that relies on petroleum for production or transport fertilizers, plastics, chemicals, machinery becomes more expensive. Factories idle, shelves empty, and inflation accelerates. In real terms, $150 oil today is equivalent to a global economic squeeze of unprecedented scale. Let's step back into history. The 1973 oil embargo by OPEC nations triggered a quadrupling of crude prices, leading to stagflation in the United States and a global recession. The 1979 Iranian Revolution caused a second spike, sending energy prices and panic soaring worldwide. Today, the global economy is more interconnected, more dependent on uninterrupted energy flow, and more vulnerable to a single choke point. The stakes are far higher. In 2026, a $150 barrel is not just a repeat of history. It could surpass it, impacting economies simultaneously at a scale never seen before. Even industrial giants like China and the European Union are vulnerable. China relies on Iranian oil for roughly 10 to 15% of its imports, often circumventing sanctions to meet demand. Europe, already wrestling with the energy transition, depends on Middle Eastern crude and refined products to supplement its dwindling domestic production. Any disruption forces emergency measures, expensive fuel imports, and increased reliance on coal or LNG, further inflating costs and carbon footprints simultaneously. And what about everyday life? Picture a mother in Dhaka paying double for cooking gas. A trucker in Lagos halting deliveries because diesel costs exceed revenue. A small manufacturer in Istanbul forced to idle machines because electricity bills spike. It's not an abstract economic report. It's real human pain. $150 oil is not a statistic. It's meals missed, schools closed, and factories silenced. Then comes the geopolitical feedback loop. If Iran follows through on threats, its neighboring Gulf nations and Western powers may respond with military posturing, sanctions, or even naval blockades. Each action intensifies risk perception in the markets, pushing oil futures higher, increasing insurance premiums, and accelerating the chain reaction across finance, trade, and domestic economies worldwide. Diplomatic solutions, historically slow, may not keep pace with market panic. Every day of delay compounds the shock. It's a final chilling layer. Global food security. Roughly 35 nations rely on Middle Eastern oil to import food or run domestic agricultural systems. Modern agriculture is energy intensive, dependent on petroleum-based fertilizers, pesticides, and fuel for machinery. When oil spikes, food production costs skyrocket. In countries like Egypt or Bangladesh, staple food prices could soar 30 to 50% within months, leading to shortages and social unrest. Famine is no longer a distant scenario, it's a looming risk tied directly to energy stability. In sum, $150 oil is not just an energy crisis. It's a cascading catastrophe spanning supply chains, financial markets, national budgets, political stability, and human livelihoods. Iran, sitting at the nexus of this system, holds the power to trigger a shockwave felt from the Gulf of Mexico to the streets of Paris. From Tokyo to Lagos, the world's interdependence is its vulnerability. As we watch these events unfold, the question remains, will diplomacy prevail, averting economic disaster? Or are we witnessing the early stages of a global energy crisis with consequences unseen in modern history? Reflect, discuss, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because understanding the real stakes of $150 oil today may be the difference between preparation and panic tomorrow.